Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Sam Spencer. We're going to get kick-started really soon. We're just waiting for a few more people to show up. I think we've got almost 50 people registered for this webinar today, which is kind of exciting. So in about 1 or 2 minutes, we'll get started. We'll kick this off. I see it's hit 1 o'clock, and I know everybody's kind of probably here for lunch and everything. So we might do a little bit of a round of intros and give you a little bit of background on what we're going to be talking through today. And then we'll go from there. That's my plan for the day. So hello everyone, my name's Sam Spencer. I'm Chief Executive Officer of Aristotle Metadata and one of a really growing team now. If you could see over my shoulder, you'd see how big the office has grown. And this is going to be our final webinar in this year's series, and it's going to be a bit of a refresh on what we've done in the past. And we're going to be working with our marketing team to do these more regularly moving into next year. So we've got this fantastic new marketing team, Brand Rebellion, who's been helping us set these up. And moving into next year, we've got a series of 6 already lined up from January all the way through to the end of June that we're going to be working through. So there's going to be a lot of regular releases that we're going to be doing with people to help them get familiar with what we're doing at Aristotle and help them explore what they can do, especially for users of the system and for people who would like to know more about what Aristotle is. So I can see we're almost at about 20. So I think that's a really good starting point for us to jump into the agenda of what we're going to be looking at today, because I think there's a lot for us to cover today. We've been really active behind the scenes doing a lot for the platform. So what I want to do is just give you an overview of what we're going to be talking through, and then give you a bit of a preview on some of the things we'll be talking, the new features we're going to be releasing today as well. So yeah. So today's webinar is really looking at probably 2 things. So first of all is introducing everybody in our community to something that we call MAST. So if you've been following us recently, you would have seen that we launched a new methodology with the Data Management Association in Canberra a few weeks ago. So we're going to be doing a bit of a refresh of that and talking through what MAST is and what we call the ideal metadata framework is. And then in this talk, we're going to be talking through some of the features that we have in Aristotle to support that. So looking at what we can do with Aristotle to support the development of data governance culture, not only just getting outcomes, it's about getting that cultural perspective and understanding what we can do in our organizations to, build an awareness of what data governance is and what metadata governance is and why it's really, really important. And then lastly, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at 2 really cool features, I think. So looking at 2 features that are towards the end of the life cycle. So these are going to be really valuable for people who've been with Aristotle for a while. But 2 features that are looking at how we can kind of harmonize these terminologies, because I think this is a really big topic in data management is how do we harmonize these business terms? What can we do to get people talking the same language? And then lastly is looking at federation. How do we share what we do with other organizations through the Aristotle Metadata Registry? So that's really what we're looking at today, is looking at, what is data governance and how can we build an understanding of data governance in our organizations? What can Aristotle do to support that? And then we're going to look at 2 or 3 features in the platform that help us move in that direction and build that leadership in our organizations. So first of all, and I'm going to have to duck because there's words behind my head here, is this is a slide that I've taken directly from the launch presentation we did about what MAST is. And what MAST is, what the MAST manifesto and what the MAST methodology are around is building an understanding of why has metadata management been struggling so long for achieving the great outcomes that it's trying to do. I think a lot of organizations, especially now with cybersecurity and data security in such a big kind of focus, are really looking at what they can do to document and govern their data better. What assets do we have and where are they? It's not just about bringing data into a new environment or dumping it into a data lake. Data lives across our organizations. It's in spreadsheets and share drives. It's in really complex cloud systems. It's in lakes and it's in all sorts of systems in between. we can't just bring data into one environment because there's always going to be people who have a specific need for a specific system. So we need to build this culture of documentation. And I think, you know, a lot of you who you know, work with data documentation and data governance, now's your first opportunity to give a bit of a reaction. So if you've had that challenge of not being able to get business areas to document data well, like throw an applaud reaction in there to just show some engagement around that, because I think that's been a big struggle for a long time, is how do we get business areas to understand, getting a couple of claps there, to understand what their responsibilities are. Like, what are we doing to know where our data is? And I think a big challenge of that is the point that's behind my head there, and I'll just duck down, is where do you start? You know, we have this challenge of, you know, in an organization, there'll be tens to hundreds of legacy systems. You can kind of see this one right here. Tens to hundreds of legacy systems holding decades of data. We can't get rid of it, but how do we start the process of documenting it? What can we do to actually encourage business areas who are responsible for data to take an active role in documenting their systems? And that comes to 4 major principles that we kind of laid out at that presentation. I'm not going to step through all of them individually. I'm just going to show them up in one big block. I have to keep sliding over here. I'm just going to adjust my chair. Get out of the way then. Oh, thank you, Lauren. So if there's any questions throughout, if there's any questions, especially through this, please drop them in the chat. But what we've put up here is what we're calling the MAST manifesto. And what we're trying to build here is a set of organizational beliefs around why data governance is important. And they focus on 4 major principles. Firstly, we need to get our organizations to understand why metadata is important. You know, metadata is how we interpret data. It's how we understand what we hold in all of these disparate systems. If we don't have metadata, we don't know what's in those systems without going in and interrogating them. And that can be risky, it can be expensive, and it can be challenging, especially quite quickly. We need to build an organizational understanding that metadata is quite important. We need to understand that it's necessary for humans to be involved in this process. One thing that we've seen through a lot of engagements with a lot of users is there's this desire for us to, you know, do it quickly. We'll just automate the development of this. But the challenge there is understanding that organizations and people need to take an active role in the documentation and in the analysis of what their data means. You know, only a person knows what a student is or what a patient is. How do we define these business critical terms? You know, who's responsible for the analytical development of this documentation? And then the last 2, I think, are the most interesting kind of change that we're seeing in data governance. And that's firstly, the role of data governance teams isn't to document information. It's to be a support network for the rest of the organization. And this is, I think, the most critical value that our organizations and our firms and our government departments need to take on, is to understand that we can't just take definitions and throw them over the fence. We need to have a group of people who are there to do peer review and support, but really drive that organizational change and go, the responsibility for documentation of data comes back to the business areas. You know, if you make data, you have a responsibility to write down what it means. And then that last piece is that data governance really needs to focus on building resources and building people around it. So our data governance teams need to be teams, and they need to have really diverse skill sets. It's not just about data analytics. It's not just about visualization. It's about language skills. It's about communications and collaboration skills, and going, what are we doing to drive that, you know, that conceptual understanding of what our data is as well. I've got a handout. I actually had a handout that I was going to show off and hold, but we've got handouts that we'll be sending out to everybody that have all of this on, because I think this is the most critical thing in any change program when it comes to data governance, is building this shared terminology. One of the things that people raised during our presentation was that this was the first challenge, is regardless of the tooling we use, we need to build a shared belief that metadata is important. And these are the ways that we can do it. Is, I think, one of the questions that we had during the launch program was, how do we get people to buy into this? And I think it's by putting these terms in front of people and saying, you know, this is what we believe is important. So again, like audience participation, like, are these the kind of things that we believe are important in data governance? Like, again, like, and throw a question, or I think we'll pause for audience participation here and go, like, are these the kind of beliefs that we need our organizations to take on board to actually, start documenting our data better? Lots of thumbs up. And no questions yet, but I think if they come through in the next couple of phases, please let me know. So I think that's great. Like, that's a really good, like, there's a lot of thumbs up, which is fantastic. But I think, again, there's a challenge. And the challenge is, especially for us, is what can organizations do to enact this? So if we've got this shared belief in the organization that we know we need metadata, we know that it's not just technical information, but it's business information that's being developed by supporting teams, what can we do to drive this across the organization? So we've got a comment from Jess saying, completely agree on the need for a common terminology between technical data and end users as a critical success factor, which I think is great. Like, that's really what we're trying to drive here, is we need people to come to a common understanding. And that's what we've tried to write down here. One of the other great things is when we share some of these slides with you, these are actually all Creative Commons, and we're going to be doing a lot early next year to make this available to the rest of the data management organization. You don't need to use an Aristotle to believe in MAST. And then I think is a really useful thing is we can do a lot of this work without technology. It really comes down to people. But what can we do? So this was the second phase, is what we wanted to understand is what can we actually do to change this? So one of the critical questions that people would ask is where do I start? Like, we've got all of this to do. And I think, again, throw the thumbs up, if you've been involved in an organization where they say, we're going to build a data asset register. That's what we're going to do. We're going to document everything. Now, I don't know about everybody else, but I have this horrible issue of choice paralysis. If there are 3 options, my mum used to say, I would always pick a 4th. It's hard to know, and it's hard to know where to start. Like, if you've got this big, menu of things to do, there's this big challenge in front of you, finding a starting point is hard. So that's where we've focused on next, is building. I'm going to just double check my slides with my head in the way. There we go. I'm going to build my slides so there's nothing in the bottom corner anymore. So what we did was we built this thing called the ideal framework. And it sounds a bit much, calling your idea the ideal idea. But the reason for that is we started to notice 5 really common steps in any change program that were done in an operational capacity. So when we talk about MAST and the MAST methodology, it's not a project methodology, it's an operational methodology. I'd like to think that starting from today, there are people who are going to be doing this kind of work for the rest of their careers. And that's a good thing. Like, that means that we're doing this consistently and we're building that consistent process. What are we doing to continuously drive towards high quality documentation of information? And the thing that you'll notice is it's a circle. Like, it really does continue in on itself. And I think one of the biggest pieces of feedback from users and from our own staff was there is no starting point. Right, we take the area that our organization wants to focus on first and use that to drive us through the rest of the circle. What it is it's a way for us to understand what we need to be focusing on now, and helping us focus on the steps that we can the steps that we can focus on now to get the outcomes we want to achieve now without kind of delving too deeply into the weeds. And I'll look at that in our case study soon. So the idea is we've got this pragmatic process of bringing people along this journey and going, what can we do to document this information? How can we work across our organization in a slow, methodical fashion to achieve these critical outcomes? And what that looks like is this. I'm in the wrong spot for these slides. So first of all, we've got this idea of an investigate and inventory our data. I think this is, again, a really critical starting point for us to understand from, where if you're not sure where you are in that journey, this is a really good starting point. And I think this is one that the Office of the National Data Commissioner has done really, really well, is they've said we want people to think about what data they have in their organization. And that's what we're focusing on, is just what assets do we have available. Early in the new year, we're going to be doing an entire seminar series on each of these steps, but to kind of get you understanding where we're going on this journey, we're going to step through all 5 and just say the first step in any data transformation program is just writing down a list of assets. That could just be a name and a description and a location maybe of all of the things across our organization, and using that as a starting point for us to understand where we want to move to next. So we've got a comment from Matt saying, many years ago, they inquired about a data dictionary for classifications, and it was whatever the team decides. And I think we'll come to that challenge soon, Matt, of, how do we build that consensus? So, and a part of that is just getting a starting point, getting everybody in the organization to write down some documentation about what your data means. The goal here in this step isn't to document every field. It's not to build a harmonized approach and understand how this fits in with the organizational picture. The first step really is just getting everybody that you're working with, everybody who will engage with the process, to write down what they're working on. That could be one data asset, it could be 100 data assets, it could be anywhere in between. But starting with one is always a good starting point. The areas that we want to engage with will help us document, or help us build that inventory out so we can move on to the next step. But the idea is if we achieve this step, we've got a really clear understanding of what assets we hold. Moving on to the next step, there's this idea of documentation of data, right? This is our traditional metadata challenge of going, now that I've got a single data asset, how can I document what the fields mean so that others know what it's about? How can I bring that common understanding and go, well, this data asset is about, demographic standards, which is the example we'll be looking at soon. And it's about, people, it's about their age, it's about their occupations. Those are the kind of things that this data asset is about. One of the challenges that we saw, especially in this process, is we tried to build that common terminology too quickly. What we often see is that people will try and build that data dictionary and work with one business area and try and get them to use a different business area's terms. I think the biggest piece of feedback that we got is that's not the right approach. The first thing that we can do is when we bring these assets into a registry to start centralizing it is documenting it as is. Use business terminology, use it as they use it, and recognize that there are later steps that we can use to harmonize those terms together. So as I said, don't try to harmonize too early. I think that's probably the most critical thing to take from this presentation is the earlier when we try and harmonize terms, when we try and build consistency across 4 or 5 different business units and say, you're all talking about the same thing, there tends to be a little bit of friction about getting people involved in the process. So what we want to do is at this stage, just get them talking about the data they hold and getting into a centralized place so others in the organization know what it means when we go to endorse and publish it. So when we bring these assets in, we know what's there and we know what's available. So again, I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to start moving through these next couple of slides really quickly. But the idea is that at this endorsement stage, this is where we can start, surfacing it across the organization. So once we start to get that completeness, that's when we can tell people what there is. The idea is, again, we want to document those approval processes and understand, what others in the organization mean and why they think that, what governance processes have they been through. Now that we've got that really clear inventory, that clear documentation, what do they mean and who's authorized the use of those terms? Is there legislation? Is there a piece of internal policy? And how can we surface that so that others can see it? And now we get to this audit stage. What we call the audit and harmonization stage is about how we bring that together. What do we do when we start to see that lack of consensus, when we start to see these multiple terms that all mean the same thing? How do we bring that together in a system that allows users to, start to build that common framework, that common understanding? Going back to Jess's challenge is when we get 5 or 10 business units documenting their information, how do we build that common terminology so that we can identify those really clear linkages across data? But don't force agreement. Don't force that harmonization too quickly, because again, we want to build that long-term vision, that long-term process. This isn't a once-off cycle. This is a continuous process. This is a continuous challenge for us to drive adoption of this, of these standards, of these tools across the organization. And then lastly is that leadership and that long-term strategy approach. Again, we want to see this as a starting point to the rest of the journey. We won't go through the ideal cycle once. We go through it continuously again and again with each different business area. And again, the focus here is that understanding that not everybody's going to be at the same process at the same level. In an organization with tens to, or hundreds to thousands of people who are operating on different data projects, some may only be at an inventory stage. They may only be at the capability where they have the time, the resources, or the knowledge to just document the assets they hold. Whereas others will have very clear governance processes, they'll have very clear documentation. So what we want to do is understand that everybody's going to be operating at their own kind of level, and helping them through the journey is really the key here. Again, the idea is that the more we get into a centralized system, which we'll see on the next slide, the more we get into this centralized system, the more we have the capability to know what's happening across the organization. So this is the slide that we've Creative Commons that we're going to be sharing with everybody. And the idea is what this is designed to do is it's designed to give everybody an understanding of what their processes are. We've used this terminology really clearly internally because it helps us understand where certain clients are. Somebody that we're working with who, there we go, somebody that we're working with may only be at the documentation phase. And we know that we don't want to do that auditing too early. We know that we're working with business areas who aren't at that level of maturity. So we're not going to try and build that consistency, because what we want to do first is just document their assets and maybe get them to publish some. We're going to focus on auditing after we've started to build more of a rapport with those business areas to help them understand what they need to do. So that's in a generic nutshell. So if you haven't seen MAST before, that's what we're talking about. We're going to be talking about this a lot internally and externally with our clients and in a lot of our messaging, because what we saw from the Dharma, the Dharma launch of this was that this is the terminology that people can take into their own organizations. And again, as you've noticed, I haven't said Aristotle through any of this. We've got a little logo here. I'm going to keep interacting with the slides now. I really like this feature of Teams. We've got the logo here, but the rest of this is designed to be used in Word documents, in Excel, and as my colleague Heather, who launched this with us from the Australian Communications and Media Authority, is this can be done in our organizations today. So we're going to be building a lot of tooling to help people along this journey to help them start documenting this information. But again, when you go back and review these slides and when you review the launch slides, you'll notice that really this is focused on what we can do to build that consensus and build an understanding of why metadata is really important for us. So before I jump into all of the Aristotle stuff, I'm going to pause for a drink of water because I've been talking a lot, and kind of open it up to Q&A in the chat. Like, is there any questions or thumbs up, feedback, thumbs down? This is terrible, Sam. This is not what we do or what we want to encourage people to be working on. Oh, good. Oh, that's a lot of thumbs up. It's more than I was expecting. Oh, snap. Any questions before we move through the rest? Nope. Okay. So I'm not benevolent. I'm a businessy guy. I'm an ex-public servant businessy guy. So we put this out there because I think, again, this is really important to help people understand what they're trying to achieve. And again, if all you do from this session today is take this terminology and help use it to help your organization understand the value of data documentation, I think we've all achieved what we need to achieve. But there's actually a lot. I'm going to just turn myself off for this slide. I'm going to disappear for a second. There's actually a lot that we can do in Aristotle to do this, because again, I think what we saw was we developed this methodology because we started to see common challenges and common ways that people were interacting with the tools in Aristotle to use it in their organization. So we started to see these being used really consistently across our client base to do particular activities at particular points. So what I've done here is I've called out like some of the tooling in Aristotle, from our bulk uploads to help us build our inventories, and those custom fields to help us capture things like our ONDC core attributes. There's a lot we can do in that inventory phase that we've done with a lot of clients that haven't involved the rest of the registry. So I think people, again, see metadata as this big encompassing challenge. And what we're going to be doing next year is really helping to narrow that down to help people understand what their data means. That data and documentation piece is where we do where we work best. So data documentation is really a core component of Aristotle. And what we'll see is we're going to do a little bit of an exercise in a second on that data dictionary import focus. How do we build those terms once we've started to get an understanding of what's across the organization? How can we bring them into the registry to help people browse and find them as part of an example leading into the next phase? We have this concept of metadata reviews through Aristotle. So when we get to that endorsement phase, after we've done an inventory, we've documented our assets, we have an entire review and publication workflow process that allows us to do that peer review. How do we build that support network? When we have these, when we have our metadata teams set up, how do we build that support so that data governance areas can do that review rather than documenting wholesale? And then, lastly, we've got this audit and harmonization focus, which is one that I think we've had a lot of feedback on, but we haven't had a lot of tooling on, which is about to change or has changed in the last couple of weeks. And that's where we start looking at the ability for us to find and relink lots of common terms across the registry. So how do we build common frameworks and build common terminologies to help them understand what that means? And then lastly, we're going to do a bit of a preview of an in-progress tool that we'll be releasing in January. So it's not live right now, but will be live in January about Metadata Federation. And what we talk about, what we mean there is how do we build, how do we build consistency across registries? So where a user has multiple, where data is flowing across multiple organizations, that can be private or public sector departments that are sharing data. How do we bring those terminologies across so that when we get data, we get the metadata along with it? So that leads us into probably the second half of the talk, which is that's what we're doing in a nutshell. That's why we believe MAST is important. And to do that, we're going to look at this really interesting scenario that we've built for us today. So there we go. I'll just lean over. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at three basic steps in two registries that we've stood up for this purpose. So we've stood up two metadata registries. One on the left is the Koala Metadata Registry, which is designed to show, that I practiced all of this before. It's designed to show that we can bring this metadata across from two different systems. So we've got these two systems that are connected. We've got the Koala Metadata Registry, which is designed to represent like one client, one government department, one private sector organization that is building public standards that they want others to know about. Secondly, we've got our Wombat Metadata Registry that we'll be looking at that's kind of themed differently so we can see the clear differences. And what that's going to do is it's going to show how we can pull that across. So as part of that scenario, what we're going to do is we're going to do this. We're going to bring a whole bunch of definitions into the registry, like in an Excel format, just so we can start building out what's available in Koala. So we've got a data dictionary we're going to import in. We're going to start documenting these assets. Secondly, we're going to do a bit of a harmonization on that. We're going to see directly what that means. So we're going to see some inconsistent terminologies or some inconsistently used terms, and we're going to harmonize those and bring them together. And then thirdly, we're going to bring that cleaned up data dictionary across into Wombat to show how you can clone or copy information, or we'll be able to clone and copy information starting in January into a new system. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to just quickly stop sharing my screen. I'm going to stop presenting and I'm going to, there we go. I'm going to start sharing my screen now. So I'm going to share the big TV in front of me. Here we go. Groovy. What I might do as well, here we go, is you can't see me as well. You're only going to see my screen, but that's fine. So everybody should be able to see. Can I get a thumbs up? Can you see the Koala Metadata Registry in front of me? Yeah, a couple of thumbs up. Fantastic. And what I'm going to do is, so I'm going to quickly bring across my data dictionary, and I've got our slides that we're going to send out to everybody as well. So in the Koala Metadata Registry, we've set up a nice green little header, and in Wombat we've done the same. but it's just this brown. So you'll be able to see really clearly which registry we're looking at. So this is going to become really useful in the next phase. So in Koala, we're going to do a couple of things. So firstly, what I want to do is I'm going to show you that documentation phase. So I've already done a little bit of an inventory, and as you can see, I've got a data dictionary that's already brought in, but I want to bring some more content in because I've gone across my organization and said, I know we've got business terms. I want to bring some of those into the registry. What that looks like is it looks a little bit like this. So here's my lunch and learn. We've got this data dictionary here that has, there we go. We've got this data dictionary that has all these terms that are related to a business product or multiple business products in this case. As you can see, we've got data elements and terms that relate to people. We've got data elements that relate to citizens, and we've got data elements that relate to humans. What I did was I went out to all of my business areas and I asked them, tell me about the data you're collecting in the terminology that you use. I didn't want to do that harmonization too early, so I let them tell me in their terms, what do they talk about when they talk about their data? These three different business areas have said, I use human, I use citizen, and I use person, but in my expertise as a data governance person, I think there's a bit of an overlap with these, and I want to harmonize them together, but I don't want to do that too early. So I haven't pushed back. Lesson 1 is part of that documentation phase is letting them use the terms they use, and we're going to pull that together in the registry. So now that I've seen my data dictionary, what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload it into the system, and I'm going to go create metadata. And I'm just going to upload, we've got this simple data dictionary format that we use for a lot of this. Again, we'll be sending out links to this early tomorrow so that everybody can kind of review and test this out. But if I upload my simple data dictionary format, what I can do here is I can just drag this in and oh, it worked. It's always a challenge, a test on these live demos. It's worked. So it's found all of my data elements, it's found all of my terminologies, and it's brought it all in. So I'm going to save this now, and it's going to create all those objects. So if I go to browse my registry and start seeing all of these business terms, what I will see in a second, so it's just browsing, creating, there we go. So it's gone through and it's created a whole bunch of content. So I can see it's grabbed a little bit of this technical information. For the purposes of this demo, I've made everything text. And what that's done is, oops. There we go. So we've got this nice little text object that's linked to all of my columns. So I've got 60 new data elements that have been documented in the system. They've been brought in, and I'm now starting to see when I refresh the page a lot more. Let's save that. Upload complete. So a lot more content coming into the system. Hang on. There we go. 60 to 81. It was just cached for a second there. So I've got citizen data. I've got person data, I've got human data. It's starting to become a bit of a challenge. So now that I've started bringing everything into the registry, I'm starting to see this inconsistency of terminology that needs to get cleaned up. And this was one of the coolest challenges that we've worked on in a while. And I say that because I kind of had a hand in writing this tool. But the challenge here is like we've got all of these inconsistent terminologies that are being used. And what I really want to do is I want to show that all of these actually relate back to my common demographic metadata dictionary. So I've set up these really well-managed terms, and I want to be using those. These are all talking about person. How do I bring all of that together? So for our metadata users, for users of the Aristotle Metadata Registry, you might notice that you'll start seeing as an administrator access to this Metadata Merge tool. The Metadata Merge tool is designed to help us bring those terms together in a really clean way so that we can start updating all those references. What I can do here is I can select. So what I'm going to do is, actually before, let me do this. To show what's happening, I'm going to jump in and I can see I've started to get a number of different conflicting terms. Like this is my challenge here, is I've got two different definitions for person. I've got different definitions for human and client and citizen. There's a bit of a mismatch of what this means. My role as a data governance expert is to bring these together and say, well, we're all talking about the same terminology. So what we're going to do is we're going to drive these to be the same terms across the organization. That's what the metadata merge tool is designed to do. So I'm going to say I would like to grab all of those object classes, and I've got my citizen, my client, my human, and my person that I've uploaded in that bulk upload process. And I want to relink them all to be related to, that person that's been well governed. So it's already been approved, it's been registered. A registration authority has said this is a really good quality product. I can use that and I can say updating for the demo webinar. What I can do is I can preview those changes and it'll show me all the links across the site that are going to get updated. So all of these additional terminology, so citizen here and human, there's a lot here to relink. Things like human will get updated. So it's going to find all of these terms and change them from, human highest level of education to person highest level of education. This becomes really useful when you've started to see that inconsistency across the registry. So what I can do is I can save that merge rule and it's going to allow me to review it at a later stage. So this shows me again everything that's going to happen. The idea is, again, there's a two-step process because it's going to have a lot of impact across the registry. And what I want to do is I want to update these citizen records to have that central term, to make sure that they're all talking about the same person object. What I can do here is once I've executed it, it will save that record and it'll save everything that happened as well, because when it comes back, and we should have like a little loading thing here. I think one of my devs is on here. We should have a little loadings page there. So it said the merge has happened successfully. And if I refresh the page, it shows me what happened. So what I can see here now is I can go to that item and it's showing me that it's been updated and also showing me the history as well. So it's showing me why that terminology has changed. So what it's done here is it's changed the name. It's linked it to the correct object class. So we're building, again, that consistent use of business terms. And it's changed the name of the data element as well. So if I was to click on my person, what I can see is it's now being used in 81 different areas. It's being used a lot. So if I was interested in that personal identifiable information, what information are we collecting about people? This becomes really easy in the sense that allows us to find all of those terms together. Sorry, there's a question from Jess. Is there a way to use the tool to decide what you are managing in a hierarchy? Yes, so we're not going to be talking about that one on this one, Jess, but we do have a lot of work around the idea of specializations as well. So I'm going to take that one on notice. And if I don't get back to that on this webinar, I might do a little bit of a follow-up chat with you, or you can ask the question on our community forum. So we've got community.aristotlemetadata.com. If you've got any questions there, we can show you how that works as well. The other really good thing about this is, here we go, I can see all of the source information as well. So what was part of that merge? What that allows me to do, thank you, Shikar, is I can go back and I can see these records, and it has that merge message as well. So it tells me I shouldn't be using this term. I should be using another term instead. Just for everybody's record, probably the two pieces of feedback we've received about this one as well is the ability for us to add those superseding and archival changes as well. So being able to register as an archive standard and superseding it with the new version is something that we've heard is really, I guess, being looked for. People want to be able to do that. And then the other thing is being able to update a lot of these links to merge these references as well. The idea here is that the merge tool is designed to be a guiding hand to help us through this journey, because again, one of the MAST principles, or one of the MAST manifesto principles, is that there is a human analytical process that needs to be involved. As Jess said, like, when is a citizen a person and vice versa? There might be data we collect about people. There might be data we collect about citizens in a particular data set, and having that difference is important. So how do we capture that there? The other thing that I think was being asked was the ability for us to filter what we bring in as well. So how do we bring in, just the data elements or just the data element concepts as part of that process as well? So I think as you'll see when you start playing around with this, in the metadata merger, we are calling it a beta. There's a lot to be done on this one, but I think this is a really interesting first step. And probably as one last thing to look at with this is the ability for us to undo. So I think the challenge here is that it does a lot in the system in one big whack. We go through and we update, we updated 60 items and then 60 more items, and we updated all of these references. One thing that we also want to be able to do is undo it. So if I click that button, what it will do is it'll revert it back to a draft. And what you should see is when that comes through, bit of a process. We're going to add a little loading circle here, I think. There we go. The undo has performed successfully. And the really interesting thing is now if I refresh this item, go on the right one. Oh, I grabbed one of the person ones. Of course I did. If I refresh the citizen item, it'll reassociate all of those links, and we should see that the name has changed back as well. So we can do it, we can execute the merge, and then we can undo it at a later stage if there was a bit of a challenge there as well. Can you save a business unit field in the merge data? I think I'll take that one on notice, Troy. So there's a lot that we can do around these references. So there's a lot we can do to capture that information so that we can capture information about business units as well. So yes, there's a lot of opportunities for us to do that. So that's the merge tool. Like that's pretty rad. I thought it was pretty exciting, at least. I gave it a couple of big tests and thought it was pretty cool. But that's probably half the story. So we've now got to this stage. So in our little scenario, we've got this process where we've now got a really, really well documented data dictionary, and it's so good that other people want to use it. So we've got this common demographic metadata dictionary that is standardized in my sector. I'm a leading expert in human demography, and I want others to be able to pull these data dictionaries across. And this is something we haven't been able to do previously, and I think we're still in the process of ironing out these last phases, but I think this is going to become really useful, especially if you work in a context where you do want to share metadata, or you want to get metadata from other areas to bring it into your registry to be able to shortcut that process. Now, before I move on, there's just one more question from Matt. So is there a means to associate a single variable name in a system with context? Yes, so there's a lot of referencing in the system. So there's a lot of ways for us to associate people and organizations with individual fields within the system. But again, the idea is what we are able to do through this is we're able to build that common linkage back to our business terminologies and our business glossaries, so that as we get users in the system documenting what they mean, what they think they mean about a person or an organization, we can do more with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. So I'm going to jump over to Wombat now. So as you can see, we've gone from our green registry to our brown Wombat registry, and I'm an administrator. I'm an administrator over here who likes what I've seen. So I'm now kind of in a different role. I've moved organizations, or I'm trying to implement a data sharing agreement or a metadata sharing agreement, or perhaps there's a standard that I've seen and identified that I want to bring in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my dashboard and I'm going to start building some federation rules. So first of all, before we look, I just want to show you that there's nothing in this registry. This is like one of those magic tricks. So there's nothing in this registry. It's completely empty. So I'm starting from scratch, or maybe I've started to get some draft content in, but I really wanted to start from a fresh state for this one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my dashboard, and I'm going to see if this all works. We're going to do a really big live test tour. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my administrator tools, and starting in January, we're going to have this option to build federation configurations. So what this is basically doing is it's building rules in our administration tools to harvest or to federate content across from other Aristotle metadata registries. We do have some capability to pull from other sources using other standards, but Federation is really designed around building a hub of integrated, a network of integrated hubs of excellence that connect different metadata, Aristotle metadata registries together. So when I click Manage Federation registries, you'll see the ability for us to document an existing registry. So this is me telling the Wombat registry where to go to look for more information. I want you to go over to our Koala registry, and I want you to look over there for some data that I want to bring into my registry. I want my organization to know about these standards. What you'll see here is, again, now I haven't set up a configuration, and that's what I'm going to step through now. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a new configuration, and I'm going to call this my demography example line. I can add a description, and I'll just go for testing purposes only. So it's only. And I've got a few options on when this will perform. So the idea is that anything that gets updated on these other registries, I can get content brought into mine so that I can continually get a refresh of metadata, so that if I'm trying to share information or grab information from a partner organization, I can get it on a routine basis. And that can be daily, weekly, or monthly, depending on the needs. But for this one, I'm just going to set it to manually. So every time I want to bring it across, it'll be brought across for me. I'm going to associate it with my account. So I want people to know that I was the one who set this registry up. So what it means is any content that gets harvested is going to go into my sandbox. We're going to be setting up some system accounts around this as well in future releases, so that we can associate it with system users rather than individuals, rather than people. But for today's demo, we're just going to associate it with my sandbox so I can show it to you as well. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to associate it with an organization in my registry. The reason we've done that is that the Aristotle Metadata Registry is designed to help users know who's responsible for metadata, no matter where it is. Some organization needs to be responsible for the management of this configuration. So we want to bring that in and let people know that, whichever component of my business needs this information, they'll tell us who's responsible for making sure that the content on the other side is of good quality. Who do I talk to if I haven't got an update in a period of time, or what can I do to bring it in? So that's what that is. And then lastly, we've got this drop down, and this is like I'm going to just give a shout out to one of my devs, Tour. I think it was one of the coolest things I've seen this year. It's actually quite small, but quite powerful. If you've used an Aristotle Metadata Registry before, you'll know that we have the ability for us to type and find items in our registry. And this is going to type and find items in the other registry entirely, which is kind of cool. I'm kind of stoked about this one. So what I can do is I can type for my common demography metadata dictionary, and it's grabbing that information from the other side. It's actually grabbing that information from the Koala registry to tell me what's available there. And this is the information that I want to be brought into my registry so that it's kept up to date. Again, this might be a demographic standard that I want to engage with. It could be, a census record. It could be a shared data asset. And when I preview it, it's actually going to go and show me everything that it's going to bring across into my registry. So it's going to go and bring all of these terms. One of the most exciting things that, again, I'm just excited about this. I think it's so cool. One of the most exciting things that we're going to be doing with this next year, just as a bit of a preview, is we're actually going to be building some of our own data standards to help us shortcut that process with organizations that don't have a lot of content themselves. So the idea is we're going to be building some demographic metadata standards. We're going to be building some really common terms. And what that means is if you're a user of an Aristotle Metadata Registry and you're using our common data dictionaries, you're actually going to be building consistency across every single registry we have. So if you start using some of our definitions, what that'll mean is you've got this immediate inbuilt consistency with every organization using an Aristotle. So what I'm going to do is, lastly, I'm just going to create that federator configuration, and you'll see it's now saved in the system. It's going to tell me that I can run this manually, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go in and I'm going to run this task, and we have noticed a couple of hiccups with this one, but what it's going to do is it's going to bring that log up and it's going to show me what's happening in the system. So I'm going to give it a couple of refreshes, and I'm going to talk you through the impact of this while we wait. So the idea is, again, it's going off to that registry, it's copying all of that content, it's bringing it in, and there we go, it's done. So everything's been brought across, fantastic. So what I can do is I can actually go in and I can look at my concept browser, and it's brought everything across. So if I refresh my page, it's showing me everything that it's cloned across from that existing registry. What I can do is I can then go in and I can see these data elements, and I can start to see these terminologies. So I can see I've already brought in a lot of this demographic information. And if I go in and click any further on these, I can see two things. First of all, I've got details about where it's come from. So if I click this link, it's going to take me back to my demographic standards in Koala. So it'll bring me across to my, what are we looking at? Age. There we go. Person age. There we go. So it's brought all of this information across. It's giving me this link to our help page that describes what Federation is, so people can understand what's happening. So again, if you're setting up these registries, there's a really good way to know what's going to be copied across. But basically, it's brought across everything in that data dictionary. And probably the most important thing is this here. It's actually using the same identifiers. So it's actually bringing the identifiers across as well. So it's telling me here that this item here with this unique identifier, FB, I'm not going to read the whole thing, it's actually the same. So if we did that like a little magic eye kind of trick, you'll see that it's actually not changing. That identifier has remained the same. So anybody who's using these consistent terms actually has a consistent, unique identifier for verifying that that's the same. It's just building a unique identifier. It's building unique identifiers so that we can actually track metadata across registries now. So we're building lineage across these hubs of metadata. So that's the end of our demo. Like, that's where we got to, and we're about 9 minutes away from the end of the lunch and learn session. And I saw there was one hand up, probably from one of our team. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if Lauren can open it up to Q&A, and maybe hopefully people can hop off mic. I don't know if we can set that up. But that's the end of our Q&A. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up I'll leave this one on the screen. I think this is a good place to pause and ask, are there any questions? Is there any feedback? Do people have any thoughts? So we've got a question from Andrew, or we've got a comment from Andrew. It would be useful to be able to federate metadata for data we get from other organizations to build data lineage. Yes, and that's exactly what this is designed for, Andrew. So starting in January, we're going to be unlocking this or making this available for clients. And what it'll allow organizations to do is, if there's another data set that you're interested in another organization that's been made publicly available, that's probably the important thing to talk through here, is it's only for published content. Because once it's gone outside the organization, we can't control what the other side does. So we're limiting this to only public information at this stage, but it allows us to build that lineage across so we can see, where this has come from. And if we're interested in a data asset, it links us back to that source information. So we can actually trace it within our organization. How was the data set used? Where did it come from? And link across to our other registries as well. Lauren, do we know if we can allow people to talk? Is that an option? Or is it just going to be me reading out people's questions?
So if anybody has a question, you can put your hand up and then we can take you off mute.
My question was just so around the lineage stuff, that you wouldn't want it to appear in the sandbox. You'd want it to appear as live metadata.
Yeah, so there's two stages to that. So anything that's brought across will go into its own staging area, and then it needs to be published. Because again, there's internal processes that will need to be done on the Harvard or on the federating side. So when you're copying content in, there might still be a workflow process. So once it's brought into the system, it will be updated. Well, once it's brought into the system, you'll still need to publish it on your side. But it'll allow you to make sure that any updates happen through the system as well. Yeah, which I didn't demonstrate.
Just that if we're bringing metadata across from another department and we're doing it daily, and we end up doing it for quite a few things, we wouldn't want to have manual steps to publish metadata when it's, the other department's certified that it's recorded or standard or whatever that distributional data set is.
Yep.
We wouldn't want to have to do something
No.
manual to make it published and make it feed into the lineages that people might be building off
No,
it.
so in that case, what would happen is once you've brought the data dictionary across, you can publish it, and then any future changes will just get published automatically after that as well. What I might do is just a quick demo of that as well.
That's perfect.
So I'll just do a quick demo. So I'm just going to make a quick change. So I'm saving this in Koala. Or if there's any other questions online, now's a good time. So I'm going to go back. And I'm just going to refresh this task. So once it's complete, we'll see this will update as well. So Jess, did you still have a question? Did you want to try again? Are there any other questions from anybody else online? Because I think we've got a few more minutes. And again, I always love to stay online and take questions from people from the audience. Are there any other questions or comments around how you might be able to use this in your registry? Or is there anybody who's really interested in anything else in the system? Yeah, I guess I don't know. There's 3 more minutes left. And again, if nobody talks, I just fill dead air until people start hanging up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly refresh this page and show you. So as you can see, this federated item has updated. So the content from our first registry has been brought across. So everything's been updated and brought across into the system. So no changes had to happen on the Wombat side for us to pull that content in. What I think is with 3 minutes left to go, if nobody's asking any questions, I think there's usually always a couple of follow-up questions for the community forum. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you where that is now. So if you go to community.aristotlemetadata.com, we actually have a whole bunch of information around a whole lot of things. But if you go to the MAST methodology, we've actually got all those details online, all those Creative Commons resources that people can use. So again, what we're really encouraging people to do is use this as an opportunity to just kind of use that terminology to build I guess an awareness in our organizations around why metadata is useful. And if you have any feedback on any of the features that we've talked through today, this is probably one of the best avenues. We've got over 10 staff now monitoring the forums directly, along with all of our dev staff in the back end as well. So there's a lot of people who are actively kind of following the community now. So if there's any questions that you've got or any feedback on today's webinar, we'll be putting the recording on YouTube, and we'll also be putting it in here as well. I think this is also where we're going to start taking feedback on community features for next year's roadmap, and also starting to talk through the calendar of webinars we're going to be doing next year. So during this presentation, we had to move really quickly through those 4 principles and those 5 steps in the ideal process. What we're actually going to do is throughout next year, we're actually going to run a series of workshops looking at each step individually to help organizations, especially those who are new to Aristotle, start to build some of those processes in their own organization. So if you've got any feedback, this is probably the best place to put it. Otherwise, we'll be sending a follow-up email to everybody early tomorrow with links to the community forums, with links to those documents. I think our marketing team has a much nicer version that we're sharing for our own customers, for Aristotle users to use, and we'll send through all of that as a follow-up afterwards. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up to one last round of questions or thumbs up. Like if you had any issues today, give me a thumbs down. If you actually enjoyed the presentation, makes it easier for me to love doing these even more. Like if you had a good time, throw a thumbs up. And if you have any follow-up questions, we've got one question from Ian. We've got a hand up from Ian, just quickly. No, Ian put his hand down. I think Ian was throwing a thumbs up, but it slipped his finger. In that case, I saw a whole bunch of thumbs up. So again, really appreciate everybody's time. Look forward to doing the next one in January. And if you don't hear from us beforehand, have a really good Christmas. We're going to be doing a shutdown. We've got a crew that's going to be maintaining all of our systems over the Christmas break. But we're going to be having a bit of a rest and moving into next year. And we'll see you at the first webinar in Christmas. In January. No, not Christmas. We're not doing a webinar on Christmas. We'll see everybody in January, and have a good rest of your afternoon. And from there, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll give everybody time to say the last comments, and I'll see you all at the next one. So thank you very much.